So good afternoon to everybody. So we start the new season of the Young Seminar 2023-2024. And the first speaker is Martina Contisciani. Martina got her master degree in mathematics at the University of Padua 4 years ago with the thesis A New Approach for Community Detection in Multi-Layer Networks, and she's now finishing her PhD in Germany at the Max Planck Institute for Intelligent Systems at Tübingen, working on the analysis of network data using statistical tools. The title of her talk is Network Analysis with Generative Models Combining Reciprocity and Community Structure. Please, Martina.
Okay, great. Again, I'll share my screen. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you, Paolo, for the introduction and also for inviting me at this Young Seminar series. And I'm very excited to share my research. And as Paolo said, today I will present some network models to exactly perform network analysis. And in particular, I will be focused on generative models that combines reciprocity and community structure. So as many of us may know, networks are everywhere, and they can be used to analyze interaction present in different domains. For example, social interactions between people, or also to analyze electrical grid. But again, we can also use networks to modeling transportation systems. And mathematically, we describe networks through graph. So graph that we define as G, that is the set of n vertices V, and also we have a set of edges, where edges are pairwise interaction, and in the more general case, we consider directed edges, where an edge ij means that goes from node I to node j. And we have a graphical representation on our left, where we have 5 nodes, and the edges can be directed, as I said. And the information encoded in a graph can be mathematically described also through agency matrices. An agency matrix then is a matrix of dimension n by n that encode, like in this case of binary networks, the presence or the absence of an edge. So we have 0 when we don't have an interaction between node I and node j, and 1 otherwise. Our goal is to analyze those kind of networks in order to draw like some conclusion and about the real data. So the network analysis is exactly this tool that allows us to understand the intricate structures and the behavior of complex systems. And as a mathematical tool to perform such analysis, we use probabilistic generative models, because they allow us to capture the generative process that underlines the observed data. So said it with simpler words, what we try to do through generative models, we try to answer the question about which are the mechanisms that drove those kind of interactions. And more particularly, we work with latent variable models, because those models assume that real data are complex, but they exhibit simpler patterns. However, those patterns are unknown. That's why we encode them in latent variables theta. And then once we derive this assumption, then we can code this assumption in a joint model, so in a joint probability distribution between the observed variables, so our edges, our agency metrics, and our latent variables. And we assume that this model is the model that generated our data. And it's probabilistic, so that we can encode also some uncertainty that is present in real data. Then the task is to infer the latent variables. So given the observed data, then we can perform the inference task, the inference problem, and then we can infer our latent variables. And once our latent variables are inferred, then we can use our model to perform, for example, edge prediction, but also anomaly detection, or maybe more importantly, also to generate new synthetic data that hopefully will resemble the observed data under analysis. To give you an example, let's focus now on the network here. Now the question again is, why do we see this interaction? So what drove the emergence of these interactions? So then our assumption can be that those nodes are divided into communities, and based on these communities, then we have certain patterns instead of others. So in other words, we say that these communities influences the connections. So mathematically means that our latent variables are related to some node membership that we call Z, and also to some affinity metrics that encode how the communities interact between each other. So how a random person that belongs to community 1 and a random person that belongs to community 2 interact between each other or within each other. And then given these latent variables, we can write a likelihood to observe the data, so probability distribution that explain the observed data in terms of our observed latent variables. And given those latent variables, then we have parameterized probability distribution. For instance, if we have binary networks, we can think that this probability distribution will be a Bernoulli distribution, or conversely, if these edges contains some positive and discrete weights, then we can think that this probability distribution is a Poisson distribution. Those kind of models, more in general, are called community detection models, because they assume, again, that the probability of an edge existing between two nodes primarily depends on the communities to which these two nodes belong. These are very popular models in network analysis, because also provide an interpretation of the data under study. And for example, when I collaborate with anthropologists or sociologists, it's very important for them to understand this underlying structure. However, those kind of models have a main drawback that is the following. So they fail to reproduce some network properties, like, for example, reciprocity. Reciprocity is this tendency of form mutual connection between each other. In the picture, we analyze synthetic data with increasing values of reciprocity. And we analyze this data with two state-of-the-art community detection models. And then we generate a sample network. And then we compute the reciprocity on this sample network. And what we see is that the reciprocity on this sample network is way lower than the real reciprocity on the data. So what I want to present you today are two probabilistic generative models that not only take into account the communities when generating the interaction, but also reciprocity. So to stress this once again, a community structure assumes that the edge depends on the communities, while reciprocity instead is a property of network according to which two individuals tend to reciprocate the interaction. So for example, if I receive a favor from a friend, then I will be more inclined to make a favor to him. And so with this model, the assumption is that for us, it makes sense to assume that the interaction are driven by this both mechanism. But before moving on to the models, then let's stop a bit talking about the conditional independence assumption, because this assumption will be crucial in the model that we're going to present. And in particular, this is an assumption that it's used a lot in probabilistic generative models because easy the mathematical derivation. And according to this assumption, then when we condition it on some latent variables, the observed variables become independent from each other. So in our case, the observed variable are the edges, and then we can say that the edges are independent and identically distributed condition on the latent variables. So that's why we can factorize the joint through the product over all the pair of edges. However, when we want to encode the reciprocity in the model, then we need to relax this assumption, because if we will keep this assumption, it means that the edge from node I to node J will be independent from the edge from node J to node I, and this is exactly the opposite of reciprocity when I want to encode dependency of these two edges. And so the minimal way to relax this assumption is to consider the edges connect pair of nodes together. So we can factorize the joint over the joint distribution of the edges of the pair of nodes, where a joint distribution, as always, can be factorized between the product between the conditional distribution and the marginal distribution. And now we'll present two approaches. The first approach, in the first approach, we model the conditional distribution. So the first approach is called CRep, and we encoded our assumption in the conditional distribution. And in particular, we assume that this distribution is distributed according to a Poisson distribution, because we wanted to apply this model to weighted networks. And the mean of this Poisson distribution describe the tendency of finding interaction from node I to node J. So this is the expected value of the interaction from node I to node J. And we see that this expected value is the sum of two contributions, the community effect and the reciprocity effect. For the community effect, we use a model developed in 2017 by De Bacco et al., according to which we assume a mixed membership model, which means that nodes can belong to more than one communities at the same time. And then we have to account for all the couple of communities. So in this case, U is the communities of the outgoing edges, and instead V is the communities for the incoming, accounting for the incoming edges, and W is again the affinity matrix. So how two communities tend to interact between each other. And so in this case, we are saying that the interaction from node I to node J depends on the communities of node I and node J, but also if we already see the interaction in the opposite direction, so the interaction from node J to node I. And so this is the the assumption of our model, but let's dive a bit more into the properties of CRep. So as I said, we have an additive contribution between communities and reciprocity. We see that explicitly in the mean of our distribution. And then another property to highlight is that reciprocity plays only a positive effect, because in eta can be only be greater or equal than 0 in order for the expected value to be greater than 0, and so it means that the fact that we observe or not the edge in the opposite direction can only increase the probability of me interacting with J. And then another property to stress is that okay, now we model the conditional distributions, but we didn't model the marginal distribution, and doing so would be even difficult because we had to specify the consistency between conditional and marginal. So in order to perform inference on this kind of model, we had to rely on an approximation, and in particular we chose the pseudo-likelihood approximation, according to which we could approximate the factorization over the joints through the factorization over the conditional that are fully parameterized, like we said, like I explained before. And then, given this distribution, we could perform inference on the latent variables, and we chose an expectation maximization that returns point estimates. And with this expectation maximization, then we also found closed form updates, which allowed us also to perform efficient and scalable inference, and allow us to apply our model also to dataset with large nodes or large edges. So now let me show you some results. So first of all, we applied CRep in 2 versions on the same dataset as I showed you before, and now we see that the reciprocity computed in our synthetic data then are way closer to the reciprocity of the observed data. And then another test that we made was the one of edge prediction. So we hide part of the data set, so part of the edges, and then we infer the edges on the training set, and then predict the edges on the test set and computed the UC. And the baseline for the UC is 0.5, which means random. And so higher the UCT is, better the edge prediction performance are. So we can notice that our model, when we consider the conditional probabilities, the conditional expected value as a proxy for estimating the presence of the edges, perform very well, especially when the reciprocity is high, which makes sense because then our model is exactly tailored to detect those kind of scenarios. But then with our model, we can also compute the contribution of communities and reciprocity in the edges because of this additive contribution. So here, for each edge, we can compute like a community ratio. So for each edge, we can compute the ratio according to which this edge was due to the communities. And then for each pair of edges, we can compute the difference between the community ratio of the node from I to J, and then the reciprocated community ratio from the node from the edge from J to I. And so then we could retrieve different scenarios, and yeah, I forgot to say that we applied this, in the Erasmus Exchange Network, where the nodes are institutions, and then the edges instead are the number of students that the institution sent to another. And so applying these kind of formulas, we can see different scenarios that I depict in the pictures. So, for example, we have the University of Sevilla here on the panel A, and we can see that this difference is lower than 0, which means that the community ratio of my outgoing edges is way lower than the community ratio of the incoming edges, which means that the institution of Sevilla tends to reciprocate edges instead of sending students to institutions that are more affine, like in communities, to them. Vice versa, we have the TUM University here, according to which we have that the majority of the edges are colored by blue. So which means that this university tends to have a community ratio outgoing, which is way higher than the incoming, which means that when TUM University has to send students to other university, they will check that they will be somehow in their communities, while instead the other tend to reciprocate back. Or we can have a neutral scenario like in Firenze, where the community ratio are more or less the same, so which means that the institution behaves similarly. But then we have the most common scenario where like in this case in Madrid, where you have edges that like a relationship that work mainly because of communities, mainly for reciprocity, and also neutral. So summarizing, CRep was the first attempt to present a model with community and reciprocity, and I show that these also generate networks with reciprocity that is more similar to the one of real data. We perform good prediction, and we are also able to estimate the relative contribution of community and reciprocity in determining edges. However, there are the main cons, that is that we don't have a closed form joint distribution, and we had to make use of an approximation in order to have a closed form inference. And also, and I didn't show it here, we have poor performance in recovering communities when reciprocity plays a role. So we move on to the next model.
Martina, hai 5 minuti.
Okay, great, thank you. In the next model, we follow a different approach. So we didn't want to model the conditional distribution anymore, but instead we wanted to model directly the joint. And to do so, we used a Bivariate-Bernoulli distributions whose parameter control the probability of having both edges, only one edge, or none of the two edges. And this can also be written in exponential form, where the natural parameters are Fij, Fji, and Jij. And this Jij acts like in an Ising model. So when this is 0, means that I and J, the two edges are independent. And so now we can again encode our assumption of communities and reciprocity inside the natural parameter of our distributions, like the following, and then we can retrieve the probabilities of all the combination of the edges. So again, presenting the properties differently from CRep, this can be applied only to binary networks. And we don't have an additive contribution anymore, but rather a multiplicative contribution between reciprocity and communities. And also, having eta inside as an argument of the logarithm function, we can have both positive and negative reciprocity effect. And then we can make a benefit of the properties of the Bivariate-Bernoulli, such that the uncorrelatedness is equal to the independence. We have the joint in closed form, but also the marginal and the conditional are still closed form distribution, and they are going to be Bernoulli distributions. So again, present you briefly some results on synthetic data. We have that the data resemble very well the reciprocity of the observed data. And also in terms of edge prediction, we have good prediction by using the conditional expected value, but also we have better prediction than CRep by using the marginal expected value. And this is because we have a closed form distribution and not an approximation anymore. And also in terms of community detection, we see that JointCRep perform as good as standard generative models like MT, while, as I said before, CRep decreases performances when reciprocity play a role. And then, just to conclude, I want to present also another example on real-world data, where we analyze the high school network, where nodes are individuals, and the interaction are the reported friendship. And we infer the parameters of JointCRep, CRep, and T, and then we use this infer parameter in order to compute either the marginal expected value or the conditional expected value. The marginal expected value is in the top row, and we can say how CRep again doesn't perform very well, and this is because of the approximation, while instead JointCRep and MT perform relatively good, but we can see that MT is not able to depict the reciprocated edges like this one. But then another observation depends on is about the conditional expected value, because in general, again, the reconstruction are better. And here the main difference between JointCRep and CRep is due to the probability according to which the edges are inferred, because darker those edges are, higher the probability is. So we see that JointCRep reconstruct with higher probability the two edges. So in conclusion, What I presented today were two probabilistic generative models that took into account reciprocity and communities in explaining the existence of the edges. They have different properties that I summarize in this table. But again, the main message doesn't want to be that one model is better than another. Rather, again, no free lunch theorem that according to the research question understanding, we may use one model instead of another. And so I just wanted to show you two different approaches to maybe reply to the same problem. With this, I wanted to thank you very much for your attention, but in particular, I want to thank my collaborators that were part of the papers that I presented today, Adise Safdari and Caterina De Bacco. And please, for any question, I'll be very happy to answer.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Martina. So now a few minutes for question and comments. You can raise your hand or you can just... Okay, yeah, please.
Okay. I have a question. So thanks a lot, first of all, for the nice presentation. I have a question regarding the role of heterogeneity in the degrees of nodes in the network, because in the problem of community detection now, I mean, it is well known that you have to disentangle the role of node heterogeneity from the problem of node membership to communities. And typically this is done using a so-called degree-corrected stochastic block model, where basically the constraints that you enforce in the construction of the method you relate to the second approach you are showing. So you would then include the node degrees as well as the membership to potential communities. So I was wondering whether you have thought of a similar generalization in the case of reciprocity, because there as well, and you might define different types of degrees for different nodes, depending on how many links those nodes reciprocate. So this is the first question. And then a second one is about the case. The weighted case as well, you can define reciprocity consistently. So the natural continuation.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen again? Because I think there was some problem with the connection. So yeah, first question, thank you so much, because exactly this is an important point to consider. And I can go back to the slides where I define, okay, here the community effect. Well, what I can say also that based on this simple model, we can generalize this. But it's a mixed membership model where the communities here are not normalized. So the intensity of the entries of these vectors, let's consider the node I, the vector node I that is K, that is not normalized to 1, and this can be normalized a priori and also putting constraints inside the model. But when it's not normalized, then implicitly includes also this heterogeneity that you were saying. So I have a plot somewhere else where I was started to ask me this, and I can show that the magnitude of these entries account for degree. So if I am an individual with high degree, then when it's not normalized, then the magnitude of these entries will be like proportional to my degree. So it's implicitly encoded in this model. And so this was the first question. I hope I replied to you.
Yes, okay. Thanks a lot.
And can you repeat the second question, because you got frozen for a bit? Sorry about that.
No, the second question was more a comment. It is possible to define a reciprocity in the weighted case in a way that resembles your second approach. So in a exponential random graph, the find overweighted graph. And so it seems to me that it would be possible for you also, following the second approach, to consider the weighted graph.
Yeah, thank you. The fact that for the JointCRep cannot be applied to weighted graph is just because the Bivariate-Bernoulli is defined on binary random variables. But we actually use the definition of weight reciprocity to, like for example, compute in weighted graph a posteriori. So we can show, for example, when I have the results.
Yes, basically you have a bivariate geometry in that case instead of Bivariate-Bernoulli.
Exactly. In that case, then we can generalize in that case. That was my my second point. But thank you.
Okay. Perhaps time for one more short question, otherwise... Okay, so thanks again, Martina.
Thank you.
Thanks again.